So, just for the record, I wanted to say my name is Taylor Van Pelt, and I'm here with Jerri Haussler. It is 11:30 on November 15th, 2016, and we are here to talk about Jerri's experience in the Vietnam War. So, I wanted just to start out with basic information. Where were you born? Where were you raised? Things like that.
Okay. I was born and raised in Grand Island, Nebraska, and lived there until I went off to college to Nebraska Wesleyan in Lincoln. And I graduated from Nebraska Wesleyan in 1968 and then moved to Arvada, Colorado, where I taught school.
When you were raised, were there people in your family who were active military members? Was your dad in the military? Anything like that?
My father was in World War II. He was a sheet metalist and lived and worked in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois at Rantoul was the name of the base. I also had an uncle in the Navy, and I had an uncle that fought in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. So yes, I had several people in the military.
Was he in the military when you were alive? Did he go World War II, or were you not born yet?
No. My sister was born while World War II was going on, but I was born in 1946, so the war was
After
over.
you got back.
So my parents were out of the service then.
So can you give me the timeline of when you guys met, when you got married, when your husband got drafted, things like that?
I met my husband in the summer of 1968, and we dated for that summer. He lived in Lincoln, and I lived in Grand Island at the time, waiting to go to Denver to teach. So we just saw each other on the weekends, mostly. And then I left for Denver to teach, and he went back to school at Nebraska Wesleyan. And we got married December 28th, 1968. And he came out to Denver, of course, dropped out of school to come to be with me and work out there for the spring semester. Then we decided to go back to Lincoln so that he could finish. He had one semester left at Nebraska Wesleyan. And I went to work in Lincoln, and he went back to school. And I had worked about 6 weeks at King's Food Host in the office as the accounts payable person. And he got his draft notice, and in fact, he probably got it at the very beginning of the school year, but because he left, he dropped out of school, then we decided we could either fight it since he was in school, and maybe he'd have to go after he got out, and I'd be pregnant or something, or we could just go ahead and say he's going now and get it over with before, before any family happens or anything like that. So October the 30th, I think, of 1969, he left for basic training at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and took his basic training there for 8 weeks. And then he came home. He was not here for Christmas or Thanksgiving that first year. And then he came home shortly after that, and then he went down to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for advanced infantry or artillery training at Fort Polk, Louisiana. And he called me about when he got there. First of all, there was a big ice storm, so he was 3 days late in reporting and was AWOL, and got in a little bit of trouble for that. But when he got there, then he got off of the bus, and the commanding officer asked if anybody knew how to type, and he said he did, and he was 24 years old where everyone else was 18 or 19 years old. And so they pulled him out of advanced infantry training and made him a company clerk. So he called me and said he thought probably within a few days I could come down there and be with him, which is what happened. I got things packed up right away because I was living at my folks' and drove down to Lawton, Oklahoma, and we got a little apartment off the base and lived there, and had some friends that lived below us that we did a lot of stuff with, and he worked long hours, but we had the weekends off and that kind of thing.
So how long was that?
We were down there from January till September, I guess, and then he got on orders for Vietnam, and so we moved me back to Grand Island, and I lived with my parents for the 9 or 10 months that he was in Vietnam. And he left just 1 year to the day almost from when he had gotten drafted. He left for Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And then he came home the following summer. He got an early out, fortunately, because he was going back to college. And so they did let him out in August so that he could go back to school in the 1st of September or the end of August. So,
mm-hmm. So while you were there, did you have a job, or did you go to the base very often? What was life like for you?
When we were down in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, I got there, and of course I had my teaching credentials, and so the first job I did was to substitute teach at the high school there, and that lasted about 4 times. I wasn't used to the fact that they had lots of African American students, and I had taught in middle school 1 year and had littler kids, and I was substituting in the high school there, and it just wasn't very much fun. Mm-hmm. So I quit that job, and then I got a job with a construction company in the office, and I worked that job for, a month or so, I think, until the 1st of January. And then I quit that job because it was boring. I just sat there and didn't really have much to do. And I also had a business degree, and so I could do tax accounting. So then I went to work for H&R Block and did tax returns until the 15th of April. And so that was pretty fun. And then when that job ended, then I got a job in the bookkeeping department at International Harvester dealer down there and worked that job until we left in October. So he went to the base. I think he had to be there at 6 in the morning, so he would get up and leave for the base. Or I don't remember. It kind of seems like I had to take him out there to the base and then come back, and then I went to work, and then he'd come home. And in the evenings and on the weekends, it was pretty much normal life. We just went sightseeing with these friends and, enjoyed going out with them and that sort of thing. Although the town where Fort Sill was really a terrible town. They had lots of bars and strip joints and pawn shops. That's what I remember the most about Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
So how old were you at that time?
I was 22 when we got married, so I must have been 23 and then 24. Mm-hmm. And he was almost a year older than me, so he was 24 and 25.
Can you remember the first time you heard about the Vietnam War? Did you ever think that he would get drafted?
This is what's really strange to me because, yeah, we heard about it. I would have been at Wesleyan when Vietnam, well, actually, probably I was in high school when it started, but then I was in college. And colleges all around the United States were protesting the war, but I guess Nebraska Wesleyan must have been a pretty conservative, insulated campus because I don't remember anybody protesting the war. When he got his draft notice, it was a matter of, we thought briefly about going to Canada and, not sticking around, but then we decided no, we had these military people in our past. We were very patriotic and loved our country, and that was the right thing to do. He also had a grandpa that served in World War I, and so, he was familiar with that side of it, and also had people that had been in the service. So, I look back on it and I think, I must have just been this young, happily married bride that didn't really care about world events. I mean, I was so naive and innocent, and he got his draft notice, and we just thought he had to go, and he might as well go now as later, and so he dropped out of school and went. And, I mean, luckily I was able to be with him for part of that first year, and And then the second year, when he actually got his orders to Vietnam, he was on orders to Germany several times and they got canceled, and then he got orders to Vietnam. And we even knew someone at the Pentagon, and I think he tried to get out of it, called him, couldn't get out of it, and we just decided he was going, and so he went, and I wasn't happy about it, but I had known some women that I taught with in Arvada Junior High that had spouses that were in Vietnam, and they were running around on them, getting divorced from them when they came home or even before they came home. And I thought, I don't want this to happen. And so that's why I chose to move home. I had a good situation because I had loving parents that said, yes, no questions asked, move home. We'll be happy to have you. And so I had the support of them, and he was old enough, I guess, that he could deal with it, and then plus he had gotten a good assignment in Fort Sill, so he was hopeful. When he first went in, we thought he was going to be a Marine. They said they needed some guys to go into the Marines when he got to the station where they were filling out the paperwork for him to leave for the service, and they asked him, and he said he put Marines dead last on the list, and he did not want to be a Marine. Mm-hmm. And they told him for a brief time he was going to be a Marine, and then when they got ready to sign the papers, they told him, or they asked, two fellows, Dee and another guy standing there, and they said, what did you put the Marines? And the other guy said he put them second, and Dee said he put them last. So they chose the other guy.
Woo, so you got out of that one.
So he called me, and he was all excited he was in the Army, and I had a little trouble understanding that at first. But then when I found out why, that he had almost been a Marine, I was pretty excited too. And anyway, so first he thought he was going to be in the infantry and then in the artillery, and then when he got to Fort Sill and they pulled him out to make him a company clerk, he had office duty down there, and so he was hopeful that maybe he could get a good assignment in Vietnam. So he went over there, and again, right away they pulled him out and made him a company clerk. So his job over there was to assign medical doctors and nurses all over Vietnam where they would go. And so he was in Long Binh, Vietnam, which was about 90 miles from Saigon. And it was a base that had some incoming rounds, and they had guard duty once in a while, and so he had some sniper fire and that sort of thing. But, basically I didn't worry about him too much. It wasn't like he was fighting and on the front lines and going to get killed. He could have gotten killed, but it would have probably been a fluke thing. And so we wrote to each other every day and made the best of it, I guess. And, I think in the letters that I read, I read a bunch of letters this morning. I have all of his letters. He threw away all of my letters. He brought home about 5 of them, and they were insignificant. At first I thought, well, I would write him every day, and he would write me every day, and we'd keep the letters, and when he got home I would write a book about our experiences. But when he got home, he didn't have my letters. And so I have his letters, though, and so I started typing them up. And so this morning I read through the first month's worth that I had typed up. And, I think from reading the letters it was just pretty mundane. He would tell me what he was doing. He was playing cribbage. He was, working, assigning these doctors and nurses. They had a bar in their hooch, and, they bought some stereo equipment at the PX, and they were recording lots of music. He brought home a lot of really nice stereo equipment when he came home and had lots of nice music recorded. And they had a pool there, and so he played water polo every day and was out in the sun a couple of hours. And yet he worked 16 hours a day, too, he said, and in fact he got a Bronze Star for meritorious service over there, which is very uncommon. We just talked to a man at church this week who had 26 years in the Army, and he didn't get one. And he was really quite impressed that Dee had gotten a Bronze Star for his work over in Vietnam. So, I think he worked long days, but they had I think one of the letters said he worked from 8 till 11, and then he came back from 1 to 5, and that was his typical hours. But then I think he also worked a couple of other jobs in the evening to help out and that sort of thing. But he talked about how political it was in a way, how people did good things for somebody if they thought they could return good things in return. And they kind of worked the system that way. And he got acquainted with somebody that was in charge of the steaks to eat. And so, they had steaks to eat once in a while and that kind of thing. But, I think the hardest thing probably was just being apart. And, we had been married just a few months when he got drafted, and he was gone the first Christmas. He was gone the second Christmas. And back then it took 2 weeks to get the letter over there and 2 weeks to get the letter back. And so there was an incident where he told me that he went to a masseuse, and he had an older brother that I was not close to relationship-wise, but physically he lived in a town close to where I was in Grand Island. And he told me, ooh, you know what they do when they go to the masseuses. So we had about a month of back and forth where I was cussing him out about going to this masseuse and what had happened and all of this stuff. And, finally got some of the letters coming back that said, if you don't quit talking about this, I'm going to quit writing, and I don't want to open any more of your letters till I know they're going to be nice and that sort of thing. But, aside from that, I guess, the fact that it wasn't like now where you can just Skype or FaceTime or send a text and get a text back right away and know that they're safe. There were weeks at a time when I really didn't know if he was safe or not, but I kind of assumed he was, and watched the news and heard about a couple things that happened close by. In one of these letters I talk about something that happened close by, and then he wrote back and said everything was fine, that they had a few mortars come in and stuff, but nobody had gotten hurt. So anyway, I think the hardest thing was the separation and just being apart from each other. And in a way, I think that's why we're still together here 48 years later, because I really didn't know him when we got married. We never had really been together except on the weekends dating. And even when I lived in Denver, we saw each other every weekend. I had a roommate whose old boyfriend's mother was dying of cancer in Geneva, Nebraska, and so I'd ride back from Denver to Grand Island with him on Friday night, and Dee would come from Lincoln, and we'd go dancing with my parents and go out and have fun. And then I'd get up on Sunday morning and drive back to Denver, and he'd go back to Lincoln and go to school. And so we were together having fun, but we really didn't know each other. And so I look back on it now and think, it probably had us knowing that we loved each other enough that we could last through anything. And so it's helped our marriage for all of these years.
I'm sure. So you kind of talked about this before, but sometimes the Vietnam War kind of gets the reputation that the soldiers were under so much stress or pressure, whatever that might be, that they were drinking, they were doing drugs. You kind of hear about that, kind of like horror story, like worst comes to worst. How did you get through that? How did you have the faith in your husband to know that he wasn't doing anything? Well, you said you fought a little bit, but...
Yeah. Well, just over that one incident. Actually, I didn't know what he was doing. I knew he had a bar in their hooch. But, I didn't know that he was doing anything too bad. He did come home and he did tell me about sometimes. He had a couple of times when they had a lot to drink. He told me about smoking marijuana over there. They did smoke marijuana when they were over there. He talked about watching Laugh-In and laughing his guts out. And yet it wasn't that funny probably, but it was because they were kind of high on marijuana. But I think he did that a couple of times and decided that wasn't really as much fun as it was supposed to be. And so I think he just did it a couple times as far as I know. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I knew him well enough and knew he loved me well enough and knew he had almost made it to a college degree, that he was thinking about his future and that he wasn't going to do anything to really jeopardize that. So I think the main thing was that we just kept writing each other and telling each other that we loved each other, and letting each other know a little bit about our days. And and I think I worked when he went to Vietnam. I had a job with a CPA in Grand Island, and then he died of a heart attack a couple of months after I started working for him. And so then after that, I don't think that I really had a job. I couldn't find a job. So I just, refinished some furniture and painted, and the YWCA had a class on bridge, so I went and learned to play bridge. And I had a friend that actually lived in Grand Island that I don't even know how we met, but somehow we met, and her husband was a salesman for Chief Industries, and so he was gone a lot. And she had a couple of kids, but they were just a little older, and so we played a lot of tennis. And, Dee kids me and says, well, you were home playing tennis and drinking wine while I was over there, so you didn't have too tough a time. But, I think I missed him, and so it was probably as good a situation as we could have had, though. And I feel for all of these women who were married to men who wound up on the front lines and that sort of thing. It would be really hard if you didn't really know that they were safe.
What were your political views going into the war? Not necessarily, what was your view about the war? Did you think that we should have been in the war? Did you not know?
There again, it was like, how dumb was I? How dumb were we? And I talk about this in the introduction to this little bit of a book that I've started to work on. Until the Kent State students were killed on campus, that was the first really awakening we had, and that was after he was back, I think. It seems like it, and I would have to look again at the dates, but, I think I had... I was trying to even think, did I even vote when I first was able to? Back when I was then, I think you had to be 21. You couldn't vote when you were 18 or 19 like now. And so, I just remember graduating from college, and I was 21 when I graduated from college, because I went when I was 17, because I was a July birthday. So I think I voted for Nixon, maybe, but I don't really remember. I had a roommate and a friend in college who was a big Kennedy person, and, and I don't think I voted for Kennedy. And I've been a Republican until Obama, and when he first spoke at the convention in 2000 or 98 or whenever it was that he first spoke at a convention, I said, he's going to be president someday and I'm going to vote for him because I loved him. I thought he was so eloquent. So I about had a divorce from my husband that year when he found out I voted for Obama. But and now, of course, I voted for Hillary. I'm not a Trump fan, but anyway. I don't know, I just think back, and I think now I can't be too critical of students, and yet, we all are. Well, why don't these students pay attention and vote? And, and yet I was president of my sorority at Wesleyan, and so I think I was just involved with the normal things that, we were protesting that we didn't have keys, that we had to come in at 11 o'clock at night, because this was back when, when I was a freshman, we had to come in at 9 o'clock, and kids at King's Food House were in high school, and they could stay out till 10, but the first semester we had to come in at 9. Then they changed it to 10, and then to 11 and 12. And finally, I think the year after I graduated, they got keys to the sorority house. But, I mean, I was worried about wearing a skirt to class and coming home changing into my jeans because we had to wear skirts to class and hats and gloves to church and, you know, that kind of thing. So it's just weird how I was so naive on the political scene. And now, I mean, I listen to NPR every morning and I watched all the debates and I feel like I really am aware of what's going on in the world. But to this day, I really need to read a book about Vietnam to know really what it was all about. I still don't really know, except that it was a foolish war that didn't gain us any respect. And my husband came home and he talks about how he walked through the airport coming home and they spit on him. That's the respect they had from people. And then until just the last 5 years or so, when they've been more honoring of vets from that period of time, you know, he felt terrible. He didn't really know why he was over there, but he was over there because the United States sent him over there. And, you know, and that's kind of why he doesn't want to talk about it now, because he doesn't have very fond memories of a lot of that period. Even though he had a good job over there and he had friends, he's never talked to any of the men over there. You'd think they would have had a close bond. And we looked up one guy once when we went on a trip, and I think talked to him on the phone briefly. But, you know, I showed you that plaque that he has with all the names of the guys he was over there in Vietnam with. He has no idea where they are or what happened to them. And you'd think with Facebook now he'd be trying to find them or do something, but we went to Washington, D.C., and he didn't even want to go to the Vietnam War Memorial. And when he did, he got really upset and sad, and, you know, so I imagine that it was probably worse over there than he wrote in his letters, and that he was in more danger than what he wrote in his letters, and that it wasn't a terrific experience for him, although it was probably as good as he could have had. So, you know, that's why he's really not here talking, because he just, I mean, I really don't know too much. He's never really talked too much. And I heard, you know, not too long after the war was over, that 95% of the women got divorced from anyone who was in Vietnam. Goodness. Now, I haven't checked that fact. I don't know that for sure, but that's a statistic I heard. So I feel very fortunate that he came back. And I would say we went on R&R to Hawaii in May, after he'd been there from October to May, and then he came home in August. So we went to Hawaii, and they were doing some street work and had jackhammers, and they went, you know, and he grabbed me and he threw me to the ground over there. He thought somebody was shooting at us with a machine gun. So, you know, I think probably he had experiences that he didn't really tell me about. And when we left to come home, you know, I think he had, he had gotten into a mode over there where he was accepting of everything. But when we were in Hawaii and he had to go back, I think it was just really hard for him to go back for those 6 or 8 weeks, because he was worried that he wouldn't get home. So I don't know. Anyway, but.
So when you say R&R, you mean like rest and
relaxation.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't like a military term or anything. So he just got leave, and you went on vacation. So you was that the first time you had seen him since he was over there?
Yes. So I flew over there.
So did you just write and plan it? Or usually everybody would be like, okay, we have this ticket, I'll meet you at this time. How did you?
You know, I don't know. He's already talking this first, I mean, like, as soon as he's assigned there, he's counting the number of days. He's saying how most people are over there a year, but he's heard they're getting an early out, and that people are getting out a month or two early, and that maybe he can get out early to go back to school in September. And he's talking about that and counting the days down. And he's talking about how he's heard that he could maybe go to Hawaii at some point, you know. And so, I mean, right away, that's how he's coping partly, I think, is dealing with the end and not thinking about the fact that he's here. And after the first month, after 3 weeks, he's saying the date and how it's been 3 weeks already. So I think, if we can make it 3 weeks, we can make it through this year. And so I think he took it one day at a time and kind of also was looking ahead to those times when we could be together. And we got there, we went, I don't know, as far as how we planned it, we must have I made reservations. He told me the dates, and on his end, he planned it. I remember I came to the hotel, and the doors opened, and he didn't recognize me. He stood there. I had had my hair cut and had it frosted, and he just, for a second, he stood there, and then he realized it was me. And he had been, like I said, they had a pool, and he'd been in the sun, and he was as black as can be from sitting at the pool. And he actually, the second half of his tour over there, he was a lifeguard part of the time. He worked in the nights, and he was a lifeguard during the days, so he was in the sun a lot. And but we got there, and there were 50,000 California elks and their wives in matching muumuus and shirts, and he said, enough of this, we're not staying here. And so we booked a flight over to Kauai, this little island that Elvis Presley had made a movie from, and we actually stayed in the same motel, the Cocoa Palms Motel. And, it was a nice little reprieve for him, I think, and it was good to see him. But it was really hard then to come home and leave him again.
I'm sure.
So,
especially after, getting just the little taste of having him back. So was he afraid to go back, or was he more just wanting to be with you, or?
Probably a little bit of both. I think, I think they're probably afraid that something would happen. In one of these letters that I read the first month, he said somebody had been there a year and was scheduled to come home, and he died of an opium overdose the night before he was supposed to leave, and how terrible that must have been for his family to know that he survived the war and died of an overdose the night before he was to return. So, he wasn't doing drugs like that or anything, but I think, there's always that little fear in the back of your mind that maybe you will be the one that won't make it. So, and I know he was really, really upset when the war ended, and they showed all those pictures of the people trying to get on the planes. He had a mama-san in his hooch, the place that he stayed, a Vietnamese lady that was in her 40s that kept house for them and polished their boots and made their beds and negotiated a TV and a refrigerator for them that the men paid her for, and so she had connections somehow off the base or on the base that she got them some of this stuff so that they had some modern conveniences. But he always has worried about whatever happened to her. Her husband was in the Vietnam military that was on the American side, and
I see.
So we don't really know what happened to her or her family, but they showed all of these people trying to jump on helicopters, and a lot of them that they had to leave there and suffer the consequences. So I think that really has upset him too.
So back to the Bronze Star. So how did he get that? Was it because, I'm just trying to clarify, so it was because of the long hours he was forced to work, or?
Well, it's for meritorious service. I guess he just explained this to me. Okay. My son just posted a thing on Facebook this last week for Veterans Day. He called me and said, Mom, do you have any pictures of Dad in the service? I'd like to post something. And he posted a couple of pictures, the one I showed you of him in the cap, and then another one of him in the office there. And he said, this is in honor of my dad, the man who's kept his Bronze Star in his sock drawer all these years. I mean, he's been very shy about it, and until this weekend at church, that's the first time he's ever told anybody that he even got this Bronze Star. So I was asking him about it, and he said that there were 2 Bronze Stars. There was a Bronze Star for valor, and most men got that posthumously for dying in the battle, and then presented with it for their valor. And then they also gave a Bronze Star for meritorious service, and that's what he got, was the Bronze Star for meritorious service. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, you know, it means I worked a lot of hard hours in the office. I worked 16-hour days. I did everything I could to make it better over there for the guys that were there, I guess. I don't know. I mean, he just said it's for service, service to my country, and they presented it to me, so.
So he got that before he came back here, or?
I think they presented it to him there at the end of his tour in Vietnam. I think he had it when he came home. It was in his luggage.
I see. So after the war, so once he told you, you went to Hawaii on vacation, but he still had some time left, correct? So then you continued to write. How long was he after? Was it like halfway through? Or?
It was just a couple of months till he came home. He was there from October till May. I'm thinking it was like May the 7th to the 14th that I was over there with him. And then it was probably August 14th or sometime like that when he came home. So June, July, August. So he was 2/3 of the way done probably. Because he says he was there 10 months. I remembered it being 9 months. So I'm thinking it was probably 9.5. Close to 10, he got out in time to go back to Wesleyan in the fall. So, but yeah, so he went back and I came home, and then, you know, when he found out he was getting out, he told me, you know, when he'd be flying home, and I think he flew into Omaha or Lincoln, I don't remember. I'm not sure about that. He might have flown into Grand Island, because I showed you that one picture of us sitting there in front of my garage with that big welcome home D. It looked good in those civvies, I think it said on the sign. Anyway, you know, I think, I can't remember going to get him, and it just seems like he drove up, but, you know, I might have gone and got him, and then we were sitting out in front of that sign when we got home or something, so that we had a record of welcoming him home. But
so your family was supportive of him going over there and everything like that, and was his family?
Oh, yeah. He had a brother that was in the National Guard. This brother that I said that gave me kind of a little bit of crap about the masseuse. And he had been in the National Guard, and whether he was, I think he was maybe still in the National Guard, but he had had a child, and, you know, then was going to have another child, so he never had to go to Vietnam. I think he just served for a short time, had basic training or something. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because this first month of letters I read, right at the end, he makes a comment that he had gotten a package from the Drapers, who were friends from back home. He was from Arapahoe, and he got a package from them with some cookies or something in it. He said he'd have to write him a thank you, and then he said he really needed to write to his parents because he hadn't written them yet. So, I mean, he'd written me 35 letters at this point, and
and he'd never his parents.
And he'd never written his parents. But I mean, I think he wasn't as close. I think boys aren't as close to their families as girls are. You know, where you know, I probably would have written my folks several times in that amount of time or something. But and he also mentioned, you know, somebody had called somebody and talked 20 minutes and it was $60, so he wouldn't be calling me. And I think we talked once or twice on the phone while he was over there, but just for a very short time because you had to wait in a long line to get to the phone, and you know, then it cost really a lot. And in fact, he was worried in one of these letters, he was worried whether I needed to send it airmail or whether I couldn't just send it regular mail. It probably would get there just about as fast, he said, and regular mail was 16.5 cents where the airmail was 25 cents.
Oh.
And he was, in most of these letters, he's worrying about whether I had gotten a check yet from the Army, because he got paid over there, but then they sent some to me too, and it was like I got
Interesting.
I got $130 a month, and he got 80 or something like that. And he was going to work at night for several hours, and would get $1.25 for working those hours, and maybe that way he could save up enough that we could go to Hawaii and spend time in Hawaii, because he'd heard it was $1,000 to get there and $700 to stay over there, and we'd need the money. So
That's expensive.
back for that time, it is.
That's very expensive.
Yeah.
So, do you feel like he got treated well over there? You said there was a Vietnam woman that took care of him. A lot of the soldiers have said, they dealt with Agent Orange and, like, physical things like that. I know he hasn't talked to you a lot about it, but...
He actually was exposed to Agent Orange, and he actually has diabetes, and they say it's probably because he was exposed to Agent Orange. He's on a 30%, I think, disability from the service because of it. My daughter was very adamant. He said, I don't want to worry about this. And she said, you get online and read about this. Agent Orange is because her diabetes is caused by Agent Orange, and Agent Orange is what you were exposed to over in Vietnam. And so he did some work, and he goes to the VA here. That's how he handles his medical expenses. He gets his medicine from the VA, and he gets about $300 a month disability from the VA for being exposed to Agent Orange and having diabetes. But was he treated well? I think from everything I know, he says in some of these letters that I just read this morning, that the enlisted people were nicer than the officers because he was a draftee. They treated him better, the enlisted men did, than the ones that had been through officer training. And yet I think he had a pretty decent experience. He liked his job over there. He liked the men that he worked with and lived with, had some things in common with a couple of them, knew common friends back home and that kind of thing. I think the military has treated him very well since he's been out. Like I say, he did find out, this is just within the last 10 years that he discovered he had diabetes and applied for the disability and has received all of the treatment that he's gotten from the VA hospital in Grand Island. So we haven't had any of the trouble that you read about in the media about how long it takes to get an appointment or how hard it is to get in or what bad service they get. He hasn't experienced any of that. The only thing is that I know when he came back, he said he had someone spit on him in the airport, and that people, he was in his military gear when he came home and had his duffel bag full of stuff, and I think, he wasn't ever given much respect by people until just the last few years when they've decided it's good to honor the veterans.
So was it, when he came home, was it embarrassed? Like, did you ever feel like you got heat because he was in the military?
I never felt that way. Now, he says that when he first got back and he tried to find a job, that he couldn't, that if they found out he was from a Vietnam-era military, he couldn't get the job, so he quit putting that on his applications. He came back in August, and we moved back to Lincoln, and we got an apartment across from Wesleyan, and he finished that semester of school, and then he started applying for jobs, and he got a job as a food inspector for the state of Nebraska, and that didn't work out so well because we couldn't ever go to restaurants because he knew how dirty the kitchens were. So he only worked there about 6 months, I suppose, and then he went back to the University of Nebraska and started taking classes for his MBA. And then he took the prerequisites he needed for that, and then he found a job with the state of Nebraska Department of Economic Development, and so he worked for them for 6 years, and then he got a job out here as the executive director for the Hastings Economic Development Corporation. So we've been here. He worked 34 years for them, or 33 years. So, I mean, after initially he got a job, you know, he wound up having a very good job, and he was always pretty well adjusted. But he went in to the military thinking he was going to come out and have medical degree and be a physical therapist. And he said he saw enough over there that he no longer wanted to be a physical therapist. So he came back and went back to get business hours. And so, you know, I think probably he saw more than he has told me about over there.
Yeah.
The wounded and that sort of thing. But
interesting. So when he got back, I asked you about the physical, but what about, like, did he have a lot of mental problems? You talked about one, like, in Hawaii when he heard the
jackhammer.
Yeah, the jackhammer go off. Did that take a long time for him to get over? How did you handle that?
Well, he had bad dreams, he said, and, you know, I guess it's kind of weird because I didn't know probably how much he was suffering from it a little bit. And, I mean, I think he did have some after emotional problems and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, sometimes I think he was angry for no good reason, or angrier than I thought he should have been about some situation, you know, and I think maybe that relates to it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I can't separate it from what normal couples have in terms of the fights they have, or the, you know, sometimes when their husbands go out and drink some and, you know, come home and that sort of thing. I never thought of it as being related to Vietnam. But, you know, if you asked him, I'm sure it probably did have something to do with that. So, and I mean, he's mellowed out pretty good. He's a nice husband, and I love him dearly. But
I can tell that.
I think there were probably moments in there when I probably thought about divorcing him or something, but we just never did, because I knew how much we'd endured from Vietnam, and you know how much I loved him and how much he loved me. I think it was a shared experience that made our marriage stronger.
So after the war was over, did your husband have any, did he tell you any, like, thoughts on the war? Like, did he change your perspective of the war? Did he make you want the war to end? Did he make you anything like that?
You know, he was there from 1969. No, he was in from 69 to 71, and he was in Vietnam from October of 70 to August of 71. And I think it was de-escalating at that time. And yet, in one of these letters, he says, I don't know how they can be saying 250,000 troops have come home from Vietnam when they're sending more troops over here all of the time, and that he said, you know, they're sending them through Germany so that the American people don't know how many people are really here.
Interesting.
And whether that was true or not, that was at least what he said. And, you know, and yet when he came home, it's weird, because it was like we just put that all behind us and we went on living.
Interesting.
We never really talked about it. I mean, we did probably when the Kent State students were killed. We thought that was terrible, that the police would do that when they were protesting the war, and, you know, that the National Guard shouldn't have come in and done that. But you know, aside from that, I don't know. It was just weird. It was just like we just went on living our lives and tried to make the best of it and not think about it. Did
you get any information from the government about where your husband would be or anything like that, or did you solely hear that from your husband? Interesting.
Yep. Yep. And in fact, he tells in here in this letter how, he was over there. He thought he was going to get stationed there in Long Bend, but he wasn't sure. He might still get shipped someplace else, but people had told him he might be there. And then the next letter said, he was assigned there, and now he had the peace of mind of knowing he was going to be there and assigned to that office job. And so, yeah, I don't remember otherwise. I think I got a paycheck every month, after a while. The first month it doesn't look like, it took them a while to get things going and stuff. But I must have gotten a paycheck from them that I deposited. But other than that, no, I didn't really hear anything that I remember.
Is there a specific experience or memory from, like, this era that, like, really sticks with you, or anything that you just can't forget?
I don't know. It's hard to say there was one specific thing. I remember how supportive my parents were of me and how nice it was to have them to go to live with. And I think Dee appreciated that too, and knew that because he said in the first couple letters, he supposed I was lonely, and that he was glad to hear I'd made it home from driving to Denver to take him to the place he had to be to go to Vietnam. And I think I remembered, when I took him there and how we went to this restaurant and ate and listened to this flamenco guitarist and had a really nice night before he left. And that's what I try to just focus on the positive and not remember anything that was too negative. And of course, like I said, I think it was just the separation and being so newly married that was the hard thing. Otherwise, I didn't really have it too hard, and he probably had it as easy as could be expected under the circumstances.
So your mom had been through something similar. Was she one of the people that kind of got you through everything? Like, what advice was she feeding you through this whole process?
I don't remember. She did. She would have. Her husband went away to service, and in fact, he left, and then she joined him at Rantoul at Champaign-Urbana. That's where my sister was actually born, and she's still alive. She's 97 and a half, and so I've talked to her fairly recently about it, and he went to California first, I think, and he had done some welding, and so he got a job as a welder on the planes, and so they assigned him to Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and her mother died during that time, and so her dad was in Grand Island alone, and so I know she took the train back and forth and spent time with her dad, and then back, with her husband and back and forth, but I don't know, I think they were just there for me, supportive. I don't remember any specific advice, but I kept, one thing I do remember is I kept remembering this gal that I taught with, who's, we'd sit in the TV lounge and she'd be talking about her husband being in Vietnam, and then pretty soon she was talking about divorcing him, and me just thinking that was horrible, and so just not wanting that to happen, and so.
Do you think that your parents' experience is what led them to be so supportive and accepting of what you and your husband were going through?
Yeah, I think they were just patriots and, patriotic, and so they knew that's what he had to do. And so I'm sure they probably said, well, that's, just what you have to do. You just have to do it and get through it and go on with your life. And it's, hopefully only for a year or two, and then you can move on. So,
did you have kids right away after he got home, or no?
No, we had decided, well, we didn't, we weren't ever really going to have kids. we had never even really talked about kids when we got married, and we just had fun for that short time, and the time we were in Oklahoma, and we never really were going to have kids. I was going to be a career woman, and he was going to do his thing, And my mom and my aunt kept taking me to lunch and saying, you really need to have kids, and so we waited. Until we'd been married 5 years, and then finally one day, I think we just said, I'll get off the pill and we'll see what happens. And, and I was pregnant within about 6 weeks, and so then we had one, and then after she was about 4 or 3, we said we don't want just one spoiled brat. We better have another one. So then we had a son, but. I was almost 28 when I had my first child, and
so what did you do after the war? Did you go on a lot of trips? Because you guys were apart for so long, what was that transition like? To go from, trying to nurture as best as you can through a letter to now being able to, was that hard for you?
He came home, and he was registered for classes right away, and he went to Wesleyan and finished, and tried to get a job, got a job, decided he didn't like that job, went back to school for another semester or so. And then we just we had fun. We had a lot of fun. We went out and just did things like normal, I guess, until we had our kids. And then at that time, I got a job right away at Nebraska Wesleyan, or University of Nebraska, at the Daily Nebraskan. And so I was going to work, and while I was working there, I was getting my master's degree, and so I was taking classes. And so we just did pretty much probably what was the normal stuff for people our age to do. And then he got a job out here, and so I moved out here and stayed at home with the kids for about 8 years. And then I was on the school board with a couple of college administrators, Phil Dudley and Ken Rodas and Dwayne Strassheim, and they had a job opening in the psychology department, so I taught part-time for 3 semesters. And then the psychology professor suggested I apply for the associate dean of students job, and so I don't know, life just went on.
Yeah.
We've traveled a lot, and we've had a lot of good experiences. We have gone overseas to Ireland with the college, and Germany when my son got a Fulbright scholarship over there to study, and we've traveled to all 50 states, and we've done a lot of traveling. But I don't know if any of it is a result of him being in the service. I don't think so.
Is there any... So you said before, when you were a college student, that you didn't really have an awareness, and now you're very involved in the war. Is that because you just didn't know, and then you kind of got blindsided?
I don't know if I said I'm very involved in the war. I'm very involved in knowing what's going on in the world.
Excuse me. Yeah, sorry. That's what I meant.
I have always been kind of a pacifist, actually, and so I was not crazy about him going, probably, and I was glad that he had an office job. And even now, I'm anxious to maybe see that movie that's out about the man that was the pacifist that served in World War II. Can't think of the name of it, but they've been advertising it, and he saved a lot of lives and never carried a gun, and so I don't know. I guess I'm just aware. I like to be aware of the politics of things, and know what's going on in the world and that sort of thing. And I'm not crazy about getting more involved in any of these wars. And I've paid a little more attention, and I know a couple who lost their son here in Hastings in Iraq, and so I'm not for war. I'm for peace. But I know, my husband would say, well, you have to sometimes fight for your freedoms, and so he has a little different attitude than I do about that.
What do you think, in your opinion, that the United States could have done differently in that time?
I don't know. I've been going to I've been going to look and read about the Vietnam War more now. And in fact, it's been not quite 50 years, but almost, it'll be 50 years here soon since we were married and since he had to go. And when I started writing this book that I started, it was 2002. And it says, I've had the idea to write a book. Well, now it's another 14 years later, and I keep thinking about it and mulling it over in my head. And in the meantime, I've written a couple of books, The Entrepreneurs of Hastings and Simple Faith, Mighty Faith, a book about my faith. And so I know I can write a book, and it's just kind of mulling it over and figuring out what to say and if it's worth a book. And of course, I say, well, some of these letters get to be pretty racy, I think, after a while. There's only at the very last one here, and if I send this to you, I'll probably X out that paragraph or so. But, my mom said, well, that's what'll sell the book if it's racy, where he's just talking about stuff, that he shouldn't probably have everybody in the world hear about. But I don't know. Anyway, the closer it comes to being 50 years in the past, the more I keep thinking about, well, what could I do to write a book about it? And so I keep thinking I need to get some books. So I was interested when you said about the Patriots. I need to read that and just see, because just a book of the letters I don't think would be interesting. Although if you read this, you get an idea of the routine that he had and that sort of thing. But I'm still trying to find a handle to put on a story if I did decide to write a book. But I think that's why I've been thinking about it more and wondering, well, really, what was the Vietnam War about, and why did he have to go, and what could have we have done not to be in it? But
so this time in history can be controversial. Actually, the writer of the Patriots book, he actually wrote another book because he thought that the United States didn't learn their lesson, maybe, per se. Do you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. Yes. We've been involved in all of these wars that I don't know that we should have been involved in. And maybe if I knew more about it, I would know that maybe we should have been involved. But I think we have been involved in a lot of stuff we shouldn't have been involved in.
So you think that the United States still needs to learn our lesson?
Well, yeah. Like I said, I was for Hillary Clinton this last election, and I'm not very happy about the way it turned out. And partly it's because I think Trump will probably lead a more dangerous country. I think it'll be more dangerous for us because of the way he thinks. But and I know I'm in the minority here in Nebraska. But I think Obama did a good job, and I think that Hillary probably would have continued that and kept us out of wars. And yet, even with her, I'm not quite sure what all happened in Benghazi and what that whole thing was about. So I'm probably not as informed even today as I think I am.
That's okay. Probably a lot of us aren't.
To some extent, I think the less you listen to the news, the happier you are. So I've been since the election, I've been trying not to listen to it so much. So,
is there any advice that you would give other military wives that have to go through what you went through?
I've thought about this some since you put that in your email, and I think that the best advice I would say is find you a support system. Like I had my parents and my parents' house to go live in, and I definitely think that's important. I think if he would have gone and I would have stayed, say if I would have stayed in Denver and been teaching out there, and obviously I'd quit that job, so that wasn't an option, but say I had been teaching out there like my friend had been, and partied, been lonely, partied, You know, I mean, I can understand those temptations. They're there and they're real, I think. And so I was fortunate to get to move home with my parents and have my sister living in Grand Island with new kids. And, you know, so I had plenty of things that were good, wholesome things to do. And, you know, I just think temptation is real. And when you're apart from someone that you love, it becomes hard. So I would definitely say to women, you know, get a support system where you have someone that can keep you busy and do things with that are fun, entertainment kind of things.
Keep you distracted.
So I think that's probably the biggest thing. And, you know, get a job and...
He really likes the job part.
Yeah. So, but that's the biggest thing, I think, is you just need to find a support system that can keep you from temptations. And the other thing is write to each other. I mean, we wrote to each other every day. And I did it faithfully. And he says in here sometimes, you know, you write right before you go to bed. Why don't you write earlier in the day so you're not so tired when you're writing me? But I know I wrote him every day, you know, and that was something that I looked forward to writing and telling him about what was going on. And I looked forward to receiving his letters and knowing that he was okay. So that, too, really helped. And, of course, now there's email and FaceTime and stuff, so that's probably not an option so much. But at least, you know, stay in contact and tell each other you love each other and that you're looking forward to being together again and that kind of thing.
So you said you had only been dating for 6 weeks. Was it a leap of faith that kept you together? Was it... I can tell just by meeting you, not even meeting you and your husband, like how much love you guys have for each other. How does that relate to your faith? How, like, what were you already strong Christians before that? That just really interests me.
Yeah. No, it's kind of a funny story. He was dating a college friend of mine, and I didn't even know who this Dee Haussler was that she kept telling me about. And I went to this fraternity party, and they were across the room and playing, what's that colored game that you reach across and you're...
Oh, Twister?
Twister, yes. They were watching people play Twister at this fraternity party, and he was standing there with her in front of him, and his arms were around her. And I walked in the door, and I saw them immediately across the room, and I knew that that was the Dee Haussler she'd been telling me about. And I fell in love with him. He was just the most handsome guy I had ever seen. And so I told her laughingly several times I was dreaming about him. This was in the spring semester of my senior year, and she was a junior. And so I would dream about him, and then I would laugh and tell her I dreamt about him and stuff, you know. And so she left for the summer and went to Europe for the summer and told him before she left he could date anybody he wanted while she was gone, but not to call that Jerri rare. And she wasn't even at the airport, I think, and he had called me and come over to the sorority house, and we played Frisbee on the lawn and, you know, threw the Frisbee on the top of the sorority house, and he had boosted me up there to get it and that kind of thing, you know. And then I went home, and then our mutual friends got married on the 5th of June, and I went to the wedding, and he wound up being their groomsman, and he had on this gray tuxedo with pinstripes in it and gray gloves, and he seated me at the front of the church, and I just thought he was the most handsome man I'd ever seen. And then he needed a ride back to Lincoln, and so I took him home in my convertible from Omaha to Lincoln, and the sun was setting, and I said, "Oh my, isn't that a beautiful sunset?" And he looked at me and said, "You don't have to look far for beauty."
Oh, he was smooth.
And so then I wrote him from home. I was in Grand Island for the summer, and I wrote him a letter, and I wrote it to Dee Haussler, Hissler, because I didn't even know how to spell his name. Yeah. And then we just started seeing each other that summer, and I don't know, I mean, we went from June 5th till the middle of July, and we went over to Kearney to see his brother and his wife that were going to school in Kearney. And when we came home, we were talking about getting married, and we got home and told our folks, my folks, we've been talking about getting married. And it was like crazy, because I had dated a lot of guys, and I don't know, something about him, I just knew he was the one. But I don't know why, because then once we were married, it was like, I don't know, it was weird at first, because it just wasn't, how you have these romantic dreams of what it's going to be like, and I mean, it was kind of like that, but yet he was irritating, and there were a lot of things I didn't know about him and everything, and so I don't know, but I just always had fun with him, and thought he was good looking and all of that. So
did your faith play a big role in keeping you guys together?
Well, that's another story, because I mean, I grew up in the Methodist church and went to MYF and did some mission trips and stuff, but I would say I didn't really go to church or anything after I got out of college. That year I was in Denver, I didn't have a church. And then when he went to Vietnam, I came back, and of course I was in Grand Island, so I went back to the Trinity Methodist Church over there and went to church every Sunday and prayed for him and stuff. But it was really when we had our second kid that I had them baptized together, and that's when I decided to get serious about my faith. And then since then I've been had a strong faith. I've gotten stronger and stronger, done a lot with the church. Just a week ago I went over to York with this Save to Serve group, and we made 150,000 meals like you kids made at the college. We made 150,000 meals with the women at the York Penitentiary. It's the Nebraska Correction Center for Women over there, I guess. And,
interesting.
So I try to walk the talk and make my faith important, and it is important. I do daily devotions and that kind of thing. And I think part of it is a response maybe to the fact that he went to Vietnam and got home safely. And I appreciate that very much. And then we had 2 beautiful kids, and and then when you have kids, I think you need all the help you can get.
Of course.
So yeah, and he wasn't religious, and yet he has become, at least he goes to church with me on Sundays, and I think he has a faith at least, but I think he probably isn't nearly as faithful or religious probably as I am.
Well, that's okay. I think women are more emotional, so that
yeah, I do too.
It's different. It's just a very different type of faith.
I've had people say, when you go to church and it's all silver-haired women, this is what church is, or what heaven's going to look like. It's all women.
Is there anything else that you didn't talk about the time period, or anything else that you want to say for the record, or to other women who are going through the same thing that you went through?
Oh, I think probably we've covered it pretty well. I would just say, it helps to have a positive attitude, and that's true for life, not just for war times, but helps us to get through every day, I think, if we are thankful and appreciative and positive about things.
So my last question for you is, again, I know I keep talking about this, but you just have a beautiful marriage. Is there any advice that you would get for the young girl looking to get married? I feel like you have a lot of wisdom in that.
I don't know. I think I seem to know the right one when I saw him. But I wonder sometimes, if we wouldn't have had this Vietnam experience, if we would even be together. So I don't know what advice I have except to work hard at it and, to communicate and And I don't even do that very well yet. So I don't know. I think, it's just sometimes a matter of just knowing life would be worse without them than it is with them.
That's awesome. Okay, well, if you're done, I'm done. Okay.
Okay.